I'd like to welcome you all to the Local Government Information Education Network webinar series. This webinar series is on local government strategies for digital government. This is the third and final presentation for this series. This presentation is using data and analytics to drive innovation in government. Each of the live presentations will be recorded and will be made available for review on our local government website. To ensure the best quality in our recording, microphones will be muted during the presentation. We do, however, encourage you to add questions in the chat space as we move through the presentation. The presenter will be able to review your comments and will be able to respond. This series is a part of the Illinois Digital Innovation Leadership Program made possible through the funding through the Office of Provost and the College of ACES. This cross-campus initiative demonstrates the core mission of the University of Illinois to bring research from the land-grant institution to the citizens of Illinois. Dr. Jon Gant is a professor of the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, where he serves as the director for the Center for Digital Inclusion, CDI. Dr. Gant is an expert in e-government, geospatial information systems, strategic planning, and information systems. Jon has worked extensively with local government leaders throughout the U.S. and internationally. He was one of the first professors in the U.S. to offer a course in graduate and executive students on e-government while on faculty at a leading public administrative programs. Dr. Gant received his MS and PhD degrees from the Heinz School of Carnegie Mellon University, where he studied public policy and information management. Adrian Brown is a PhD student at the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her research interests include e-government and digital inclusion. Adrian's work includes an evaluation of digital inclusion projects, including the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, the Smart Communities Program in Chicago, and a nationwide evaluation of U.S. national telecommunications and information. This also includes building digital communities pilot program for online community computer library center, and her current research exams are the adoption of participation enabling information and communication technologies among the U.S. and local governments. If you will please join me in welcoming Dr. Jon Gant for today's presentation.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. And welcome to our third presentation of our e-government webinar series. Today we're going to focus on data and data analytics to drive government innovation. Earlier we talked about the overall issues around strategy, and today we're going to focus on data and data analytics. And as I'm going along, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat window here, and I'll try and respond to those. And of course, we'll save time at the end for additional questions. And I also just want to acknowledge and thank our folks that we're working with. This grant that is funding the Illinois Digital Innovation Leadership Program is a grant that we received from the Office of the Provost and through the College of ACES to work with the University of Illinois Extension Program. And so I'd like to thank them, of course, for the support for this, and then also working with Kathy Brown, one of our extension professionals that we are partnering with, and then Casey, who's here with me with the technical support as well, and then also Adrian Brown for research support for this presentation as well. So this we're really at this critical point in our society, as I've been talking the two previous webinars, where we're really trying to understand this transformation that we're going through with information. You know, computers are everywhere. They're infused throughout our lives, and we're really just trying to better understand how we can leverage and use this technology to really make a difference. It's amazing when you look at the volume of information and data that is sent through the internet to our laptops and desktops and mobile phones throughout the day. This slide here shows just an array of data that's being used by roughly 3.2 billion people that are in the using the internet in the United States, at least. To think that, in just 1 minute of our day, we've got over 110,000 Skype calls happening all at once. We've got just an immense amount of data that's just transferring through our lives and really making a very large impact in in our everyday life. And so data is really at the heart of what's driving what we see happening through the internet and really having an immense impact. Because if you think about it, everything in our life that happens through our phones and tablets and desktops and over the internet has to be put into a digital form. And that's bits of data that's just climbing and racing through all these different networks. And it's that data which provides the life for the applications that we use and so forth. And so big data is a big part of the internet. Big data is a big part of our everyday life. And we are amazed by the amount of data that's out there and the different types of tools that are out there to help us be connected to each other, whether it's Twitter or Flickr or Facebook and that type of thing. The increasing number of tools that are available to help analyze that data, and then increasingly developing very sophisticated methods for storing and retaining and using and processing this data. And when we think about this big data, there's this notion in the industry they call the 5 V's to really help describe what it's all about. The first V is volume. And with sheer volume, we're talking about the large amounts of data, any type of data that can come from multiple sources, from mobile sources and other devices. And this data, these tools help us to gather, process, and analyze these large amounts of data and to really help to get valuable knowledge and understand what people are doing and so forth. The second V is variety. Variety really indicates that there's a large amount of different types of data, different and disparate data. Data is collected through sensors, smartphones, social networks, and it might be video, images, audio, data logs, and so forth. The data can be structured, like in a regular database that we're comfortable with, or a spreadsheet type of format, or it could be unstructured as well. The third V is velocity, and velocity talks about the speed of transferring the data. It's not any good for us just to have a lot of data. Remember, we've got to transfer data. Even right now, when we look at our presentation, as I speak, data is being sent from my microphone through my computer, being processed, sent over the internet, and then sent to you all. And that speed of that data transfer really impacts the overall quality of our experience. And so, velocity and the speed of which it travels is super important. And then also the speed to process it and to analyze it and so forth also are very important part of this big data picture. The fourth is value, where it looks at the ability to process or extract value from all this information that's there, being able to sift down in there using data analytics, writing programs that help us to analyze and understand the patterns that we see in the data. And then lastly is veracity. And this refers to the correctness or accuracy of that information. And so this is where we look at important practices that many of you are on the front lines of dealing with around making sure that you've got good high quality data, you've got a data governance plan in place, dealing with metadata management, dealing with privacy and security issues, and so forth. So we're going to talk about these concepts as we go forward in this presentation. But this really helps to define big data, and big data is a big part of what we're seeing with government. And so we look at this. So our strategy then, as we've been talking about, is how do we really help make our communities digitally inclusive, where we're providing good access. We've got programs to help people gain the skills and literacy to be comfortable and use it in their everyday life. And then it's application, actually developing uses and so forth. So This government, our local governments play a very important role in making this happen, along with our schools, our libraries, and other community anchor institutions, the private sector, and so forth. And we do this because in terms of government, in our democracy, we're really focused on trying to make sure that we are addressing the very specific information needs of the community. We know that the information needs vary from person to person, and not everyone is served equally. So we do have issues with digital divides and things like that. But what's critical here is making sure that we have communities where people are well informed about what their government is doing and what the different civic needs are. And in our democracy, there's certain values around openness, inclusion, participation, empowerment, pursuit of the public interest, and so forth, that all need to be achieved when we try and develop applications and provide them through a digital government type of framework. And we really want to make sure that we strengthen the capacity of individuals to engage with government leaders, decision makers, elected officials. It's all part of our democracy. And so this is actually enacted throughout in various locales by certain laws, such as the Freedom of Information Act, which provides guidelines for what type of information should be made available to the public. Open Meetings Act, so you know when meetings are occurring and what the agenda is and how to participate and things like that. And then other local needs for information that you might have to reach the various goals around economic development, workforce development, education and training, entrepreneurship, and things like that. So this really drives the reason behind why digital government is important and why we've got to really drill down and look at the data aspects of it. Because it's with that data that we're able to synthesize and understand what's going on in our communities. For example, I did some early work years ago working with the Pittsburgh Police Department. And there was a deep concern to try and address problems of drug markets in parts of Pittsburgh. And it was pretty devastating to see the impact of drugs and drug use and so forth. And the police really wanted to try and get a handle on the issues and try and figure out what they could do to address the problems. They had good data. They had data about people's perception from 911 calls, for example, about where certain drug sales might be happening and that type of thing. You had data about land use and the number and demographic information and so forth. But data alone really didn't answer the questions that the police department, the community needed. The community needed to know what is the most effective enforcement plan around this. So they needed wisdom from the data in order to make decisions about how to get rid of the problem. And so data is one key component, but it's also embedding that with contextual information to really define the meaning of that data, connecting that with what we know as humans, and then going from there to really try and have deeper understanding so we can make plans to go forward and meet those issues. So when we look at trying to make our community stronger and better, data is at the heart of it. And without data, we lack the vision or wisdom to really know how to go forward and so forth. So that's what we're going to focus on today. You'll remember if you were in the earlier presentations, I always present this slide here that really outlines an overall strategy that we're seeing that high-performing organizations and governments use. They focus all their efforts on meeting those individual needs of the people that live there. And what's driving what we're seeing now in high-performing organizations is, especially around digital government, is trying to say, look, we need to actually use a portfolio of services to meet those individual needs. So when we look into our communities and we're developing our e-government services, we need to have some type of online service delivery. We need to have a space for people to come and deliberate and to help support that part of the process. We might have a lot of innovations internally to improve the cost and efficiency of our underlying business processes. And of course, data is essential for making decisions. And government organizations are the largest producer of information as well too. And so how do we provide access and share that information is super critical, and that data. So with the strategy is the need to zero in and focus on the data analytics, which can be really used to help serve the individual needs of each and every person that lives within our communities. And so that's what we are focusing on today. So looking forward, we also need to take a step back. What's really interesting in the e-government movement, the use of computers in government, happened alongside the e-commerce movement, the use of technology for commerce and business. And there were just so many different innovations that we experienced in the private sector side that can really help us to understand how information technology can really add value to government services. So this one example that I just really enjoy is actually from Nike and iPod. I remember it was a few years ago, I think back in 2008, 2009. We had the iPod. It was intensely very popular, and Nike at the same time was actually trying to figure out how do we reinvent ourselves so that we do a better job of selling our products. Nike at the time was actually reaching a plateau where the demand for their shoes and apparel was starting to flatten, and and they're trying to figure out what's the next thing for them to do. Well, some of the Nike designers, they also were avid athletes. They liked to run, and they always talked about how when they run, they'd use their iPod and listen to music and so forth. And then one day they got into a discussion saying, how can the iPod help us to sell more shoes? Well, they got talking and said, if we could put sensors inside of the shoes and have that sensor send information back to the iPod about our running pace and our running speed or our exercise speed, we could write an algorithm that could help select music for that part of the workout. So if you're really, you're at the heaviest part of your workout, really working hard, and sometimes music can help you get through that hump of completing your workout. So the algorithm would select a really fast, upbeat tune to help keep you motivated. But if the sensor started sending information saying you're starting to slow down, you're starting to cool off, then the algorithm would select music that was better for a cool off period, a little bit slower, a little bit more soothing, and that type of thing. And so by doing this, now you've connected the iPod to the shoes through a sensor. You've got an algorithm there that's taking that data, doing analysis with it, and then customizing the music that's being sent to you through your headphones. And then also Nike then redesigned its clothing so you had a pocket to hold your iPod. You had cleverly placed pockets for them, redesigning earphones and things like that. So this connection then now added new value to their sneakers, and it really helped their shoes to take off. And now you can get the same type of platform connected to your Apple Watch as well. So there are some key lessons that were learned here about data itself. Let's find low-cost, easy ways of collecting data through very inexpensive sensors that are battery-driven. Put those in shoes. Send them through radio frequency to your iPod. And then use algorithms that also look at your past preferences for music. Combine all that together to give you customized music. And so these kinds of lessons have been driving a lot of the innovations that we're seeing in digital government. And so let's just walk through and illustrate it even further. Believe it or not, when we talk about this open data movement in government, we think about some real cutting-edge examples that I'm going to show in just a bit. But believe it or not, this open data is not a new thing for the government, at the federal level. If you go back in our history, the National Weather Service is actually an open data project and application. Believe it or not, the National Weather Service is a federal government-funded program to collect weather data and make it publicly available for anybody to use. They've put the data in a standardized structure so that it's very cost-effective and efficient for you to grab that data, and you can use their data to make your own local forecast. So it's interesting that here in central Illinois, when it's 10 o'clock, and if you were to, compare the weather um, broadcasts for the three major networks at 10 o'clock, you're going to see a lot of similarity. And part of the drivers of that is that the bulk of the core of the data is actually coming from the National Weather Service, which is standardized and everybody's using it. And yes, some of the other, some of the TV agencies also use their own Doppler radar, and they will interpret and tell the story of data in their own way. But at the core of it is the data that comes from the National Weather Service. If you Google weather on the internet, you're going to get a half dozen or so different places to get weather, and they'll all have links going back to the National Weather Service as well. And that's what's driving a lot of the models that we use and so forth. But that's very much an early example of open government data that was being used. We've seen lots of innovations, of course, since then, like in the transportation sector. For example, the one example in the back there is Next Bus in San Francisco, where you've got smart bus systems that will send out alerts when the bus is supposed to arrive at a particular place, and it will do this in real time. And it'll send you customized information to your phone so you know when the bus is going to be near you to pick up and that type of thing. Or then we see the mashup of other data between maps and Craigslist to find out information about housing if you're going to be searching in the San Francisco area and so forth. And then now in this next generation where you actually see the San Francisco local government actually setting up these large open government data repositories of all kinds of information, not only the transit information or housing information, but police information, environmental, administrative information, leaf collection, so on and so forth. And they set it up in a format that is open, and you can anybody can go and actually look and use the data. If you look in the right screen, there is a screenshot of one of the data sets about bicycle parking locations in San Francisco. This appears on your screen. It looks very much like a spreadsheet, and you can see the different. Oh, and actually, this is the selection of the different data fields that are there. And if you click on the one for bicycles, you can actually get a spreadsheet that shows the bicycle locations as well. And then you can use that data as you wish as a user of the site. There is a terms of agreement that you're supposed to follow, of course, with that. But this data is available for the public to use. And so this opens the door for a new way for the public to interact with government. You can grab this data and do your own analysis. If you're concerned about bicycle parking in your area, you grab the data that's available, you can put it on a map, and you can look and see what's there and do your own analysis, and then go to the next city council meeting and then be an informed citizen with this data and say yes to the new proposed plan for bicycle parking or no to it, but use it from a data-driven type of perspective as well. So this is pretty amazing to see. One of the very popular open government data applications that we see in metropolitan areas is around parking, where they have sensors collecting data to indicate whether the parking spot is open or occupied. And then that is fed into a large database that's made available for developers to write applications using that real-time data. And so here you have an investment of the local government to make the data open, and then you can see the private sector come in and write their own applications and make those available for people to use. And so we're seeing a big shift in how government relates through open data, like with this example as well. And so this has really spawned a lot of things. Actually, in San Francisco, it spawned, there's usually a lot of great positive things, but one of the negative things that happened is that it also created an informal market for people to sell their parking spaces. So if you've got a good parking space and you're getting ready to go, a couple of companies wrote apps so that you could say, yes, I've got this space, and I'll sell it to you for a price. And so that became an issue because it's illegal to sell public uh, resources like that. And we actually went to court and so forth. And I don't believe the court case has been resolved. So there's certainly a positive, and then there's some negative things that may happen. But this is the kind of opportunity that's possible when we look at these open government types of setups. Another example that's being used around the country, and it's actually one of the early uh, uh, open government ideas, is see, click, fix. We all know in our experiences and where we live that we may see different problems. We may see trash, house that's boarded up and needs attention from the local government, potholes. We're getting ready to get into the cold season, and potholes are always a problem because they pop up, and so forth. So it used to be the old way is that you would contact the mayor's office or the public works office with a complaint about it. And then there was always concern about, has it ever been reported? What are they doing about it? Why is it taking so long? And there was a sense of lack of accountability about whether or not those issues were going to be addressed. Well, this company said, well, if instead of reporting it to the local government, which you can do, you could also report it to this website. And in fact, we're going to make it easy for you to report it. So if you see a pothole, and like on the corner of Kirby and Mattis, you can just report it. And in fact, they've got an app where you can stop, take a picture of it. It'll get your GPS location, send all that data to the database, and then it gets reported on this site. And then the city can then access this data and use that as a reporting mechanism and to go out and make priorities about getting the work done and so forth. And then when you see that it's repaired, the city can put a note in there saying it's been fixed in the date, or you as a citizen can also put in that information as well. And so this particular application is called See, Click, Fix, and there's a number of similar ones on the market as well. But the other thing that this does with data is that it disintermediates the data from the local government. So one of the issues is that with reporting data to the local government, you also as a citizen have to feel comfortable that they're going to respond. By reporting it here to this site, it's not up to the government to keep track and maintain the data and so forth. Here it's in a very open and transparent space that anybody can go and see. So it raises the level of accountability for local government with this type of reporting system. There are other examples of this type of reporting that we're seeing as well, but this really shows the power of using data to do this. So there's a common model here when we think about open data. We've got the data itself. It can come, as I said, from multiple places, sensors. People can report information. There's data collected by local governments and so forth. Business and industry produces data. Our community anchor institutions, our schools, our libraries, social service organizations all produce information and so forth. The federal government actually is in the business of producing a lot of the baseline information that we have on our communities through the census program, with the demographic information and the transportation information and other public infrastructure information. About our roads, cemeteries, rails, and things like that are all reported. This can all be matched up and used to really help tell the story of your community. And so with that data, other key components are that you'll need a way of telling the story. And maps are powerful. I teach courses on geographic information systems for the last 20 some years, and it's one of my areas of expertise. I love teaching the class because I like using maps to help tell the story about what's going on in our communities. How do we address particular problems? Because many of the problems that we face have a spatial component. Maps can help us very easily visualize this underlying data. And you also need viewers. The data can appear in what looks like a spreadsheet, and you can have online tools to analyze that data, make bar charts or column charts and things like that, and or other ways of helping you to visualize and view the data and have those built into the application. You need dashboards. Um, Sometimes, if you think about it, there's a certain level of technical expertise to work with data. Dashboards are great because dashboards are designed to take data and to summarize it with very easy to use tools for the public to use. And so the programmers will do all the hard work of cleaning the data and getting it, set up properly for summarizing. But then you as a citizen can just go in and just look at the dashboard and see instantly, what's the number of calls for 911 service, or the number of reports of certain types of crime in certain neighborhoods, or what's our school performance, or what's our budget performance look like, and so forth. The latest generation is also to include what they call APIs. APIs. These are program interfaces into the data itself. So one way of getting the data is that you can download the data and then analyze it locally on your computer. Or you can write programs, but those programs need to talk to the database itself that the city might be holding the data in. So the method for your programs to talk to that underlying database is through what they call an API. So this tells the programmer the standards and the structure of the data, the meaning of the data, the structure of the data, and how to access the data. And it allows computers to talk to computers without the human interface for doing it. And so when you look at apps that run on your iPhone or your iPad or other devices, they're actually using APIs to access data. And they're doing it behind the scenes so that you don't see it. And so that's one of the keys behind developing these apps. See, Click, Fix, that's what it is. They've got this data in a particular location, and you've got people that just write applications using that data, and it's cool because you can customize it. The other part that's really interesting is that the government's not actually developing the applications. They can, and they could hire it out and so forth. But in the lately it's been very expensive for them to do a lot of this stuff. So they open it up for the public to write your own applications. Some governments will do contests to do it, and so forth. The city of Urbana has been developed their own open data portal. Sanford Hess, I don't know if Sanford's on, but he was on the earlier presentations and sent me a note. And Sanford's the IT director for the city of Urbana. And he alerted me to the new data portal for Urbana, so I don't know if he's on or not. But it's a great site. They're actually using the same company that the city of San Francisco uses for their data portal. And here are just some of the examples of what's available for you to use. Yeah, and so Sanford's on. And so I took one example here. I think it's crime data. And it looks just like a spreadsheet. And so, in fact, you can download the data and use it locally on your computer. You can share it with others. They've got the built-in viewer here, so you can actually make your own crosstabs and so forth, and to analyze and look at the data. And so, in fact, I know that Stanford is actually trying to encourage more people from the public to begin using the data as well, and also hoping to get some folks who've got programming skills to write some applications that can help serve some of the local information needs there in Urbana as well. So, and so if you have a chance, you want to see a nice example of this, go over to the City of Urbana data website and check it out as well. But it's really interesting to see this being made available as well, and hopefully we can get some students so forth involved with developing applications and so forth. The White House has been a really big push, has really pushed hard on open government. In fact, when President Obama came in, the first thing he did was he signed an executive order to put in plans for open government to try and provide greater transparency into his administration. So with their open government initiative, Each year they do a report, and here's the latest report that is available on the site, the White House website now. And this year, one of the large, very successful initiatives in open government has been around Open 311. Many local governments have, 911 for public safety issues, 311 for finding information about services and so forth. And so this Open 311 is setting a national standard for all the 311 data so that it will expand opportunities for entrepreneurs to develop applications, but it also will allow um, Open 311 systems to talk to each other from all across the country as well, and potentially be used as a way just to make it easier for the public to know about what services are available and so forth. And again, this is on that same platform that I mentioned of having data structured in a very specific way, writing, making APIs, um, making APIs available as well. So yeah, and we can send a link to the White House information, which was on the previous slide. Yeah, we'll send a link to that to the participants, so you can see that as well too. And in that report, they talk about the updates to the Open Government Data Portal by the United States government, uh, and a number of very good examples of open government types of application, like this Open 311 as well. Internationally, open government is a huge thing. Um, I've done in my early e-government work, I did a lot of work around transparency and openness. And back in the late 90s, this was a big initiative through the United Nations to help governments around the world come up with examples of being more open and transparent by using the internet. In the current day, one of the big initiatives internationally is the Open Government Partnership. And in this partnership, underlying this effort around transparency and openness, are setting standards for the type of data that needs to be made available at a country level and shared. And this is the first time this has ever happened. And so this should really help with um, making foreign investments, understanding the economy and government activities in countries around the world, and also help to promote greater openness and participation by the citizens of those countries as well. So this is a pretty good project to follow to look for different examples. Now, once you get this data made available, whether it's data here in the United States or data from other countries around the world, we're seeing a growth of organizations that are taking the data to look and keep and track and follow what government is doing. One organization that has really helped to energize this open government movement is the Sunlight Foundation. They have a particular focus looking at issues around political participation, voting, political deliberation around decisions, and so forth. And so they are very highly innovative in uh, gathering data, and writing applications, and so forth. You may have seen some of their applications. One they do around the presidential election is look at, they've got some really good visualizations of the amount of money that the campaigns are spending, and they break it down by the different types of groups, so you can get a sense of where the influence may be coming on certain campaign presidential candidates and so forth. They'll look at a very particular issue, like they looked at net neutrality, and they looked at the dollars spent by the various lobbyists and the firms they represented to try and get a sense of how people were influencing the debate around and the decisions around net neutrality, for example. And so this is a nonprofit organization that's leveraging data that's made publicly available, and then making it, presenting it for the public to use, and putting it in a format where you're actually putting the data in the hands of the public to use as well. Another example is Code for America. So this goes a step in a different direction. So with the open data sets that we see at a local level and even at a national level, there are just a growing number of people that want to write programs to help address particular problems. So Code for America is a place where you can volunteer like the Peace Corps, and you can go help a city that might be looking at a particular issue. So in Boston, for example, a Code for America team was really concerned about the accessibility to fire hydrants during the heavy snows that we've had over the last couple of winters. And so they and the city of Boston was working on this, but it was kind of a sticky problem. So Code for America volunteered to work, and they came up with solutions where they identified each and every fire hydrant in the city. They've got a way of measuring the amount of openness around that hydrant, and then you can go to a map and you can see if a hydrant is in need of being plowed out or something. And so then citizens, maybe from a neighborhood group, could get an alert that, yeah, there's some, or the fire department, could get an alert that says, look, there's a couple hydrants that need to be dug out, and either volunteers could go over and do it, or the city could go over and do it if and so forth. And so Code for America is, you've got, people with very good tech savvy skills that will take this open data and develop applications to address important information needs within communities. And so this is a good example, a good civic-minded example of some positive things that you can do, or you can hope happen when you make your data available. I threw this example in there. This is actually from Brazil, and I like this because I met the folks behind this at a digital government conference in May this past year. And this one impresses me because the Brazilian government has made a large amount of data available in an open format. And this group worked with the MIT Media Lab to try and answer this question about how do we make the data more consumable for the public. Remember, data is messy, it's hard to work with, you got to have a certain set of skills. And here the group tried to figure out how to leverage the latest in what we know about visualization to make it easy for the public to access the data. So if you get a chance, go check out the site Data Viva. And in there, I think you'll get some really good examples of ways of presenting complicated data in very easy to consume visualizations for the public to use as well. And so I really like the examples that are there. It's very research driven. Another area, combining the civic mindedness with open data, with this flexibility that the government doesn't have to do everything with data, that the public can actually play a very important part, from programming to collecting the data to doing visualizations, is this ushahidi. So ushahidi is Swahili for testimony, to provide your public testimony. And it's a platform that allows anybody to share information, especially around a crisis. So initially, in the early days, a group of people volunteered to collect information from a conflict in Africa. And so as they got reports from people about what was happening in their villages and to individual families and so forth, they would take all this information, put it into a data set on the internet, and then connect it to maps. So then you can see the power of this. It's not the government collecting the data, it's the people collecting the data. And then Ushahidi made it very easy to do. So when they saw the success for this, they said, well, we could use this for man-made crisis or natural crisis and so forth. So you remember the earthquake in Haiti, I guess going on a little more than 5 years ago. People used the Ushahidi platform to collect information from individuals that were impacted by the earthquake, people that were looking for homes or trying to get out from under the rubble, or trying to find their families, trying to find food and water and help. They were sending text messages and phone calls out to families and so forth, and the word got out to send all that information to this website, and then the volunteers collected that information, put it into a data set, and produced these maps. Now, the other thing that happened with this is that this became almost like real-time information for help. And my class worked with this data to, we worked with Ushahidi to do some visualizations with the maps and help out with some mapping issues. But when you would look through the data line by line, you would see calls for help. And you would have the exact location, time of day, and then there was also a box there when if a relief agency responded to the call. And then then the other issue, when you have public data is whether it's true or not. And so there was some other data there to help confirm whether or not this information was true. So this became such a rich, vital information resource that as the different relief groups came into Haiti, this became their primary source of information. Remember, the Haitian government was out of function because of the earthquake. And so this became the centralized repository for the latest information so the relief agencies could really manage where they were going. And so that became very powerful. A similar example is with the Nepal earthquake. And if you look in the picture there, there's a guy on the far right. That was actually one of a former student here at the University of Illinois. He got his PhD here on open mapping, and he was in my class. And he is from Nepal. And so when this happened, he and his friends quickly got OpenStreetMaps up, and they collected information just like in Haiti, made the information available, and this became the critical source of information for the relief efforts as well. And then you can see when you take that data and put it on a map, behind each dot is a story of need. So you can click on the dot and you can see exactly what's needed there and so forth. And it's a very, very powerful approach to help government in its response as well. And so I think these really provide some really good lessons for thinking about how can we transform our government through the use of technology, through the use of data. And I think to do that, here are some critical questions that we have to ask. It's not so much about the data, but are we doing the right things? Usually there's a portfolio of things you can do with this data that, again, comply with FOIA, Open Meetings Act, and so forth. Are we getting the most benefits out of our choices that we're making for using the data? And are we doing things right? Once we've decided to do some things with our data, make it available to the public, are we doing it in the right way? Are we doing it efficiently and effectively with the resources that we have? So in looking at this, are we doing things right question, there's a lot of things that we have to answer. Again, remember, there's a portfolio of choices that you have to make. And there's always trade-off with the open data and providing other types of services. And so there's a question I always ask what are those critical factors that leaders really need to think about? The first of these factors is the legal environment. So FOIA, Open Meetings Act drive most of the decision about what information that you need to put out there and how you need to put it out there. So you got to meet those certain legal requirements. Others, there may be more normative. You want to stay up with the norms within the professional fields. A number of local governments, belong to different groups, and there are certain norms and practices that they follow in terms of using e-government. And then best practice. You see examples from other places, from the private sector, from social media that you may want to try and use in your local government. In our state, in Illinois, we are right now facing, I think, 3 or 4 proposed legislative initiatives to require governments of certain sizes to provide information online. In one of the acts right now, one of the proposed state pieces of legislation, they're actually requiring, I think it's about 15 or 16 different things that to put on the websites. And again, much around FOIA, Open Meeting Act, and so forth. But when you look at this, annual budgets, lobbying disclosures, the salaries of public officials, so on and so forth. And I looked through all of the proposed legislation. I said, and I believe I'm obviously a big advocate of things on the web. And I looked through the legislation, and the problem is that nowhere in the legislation did I ever cross a line that said this is how it will be paid for. And so that's why it's a challenge for local government around these initiatives in our state as well. There are organizational factors. What kind of capabilities do you have among your staff to do this? What are the costs to do this? And how do I do it in a way that really provides good service quality? There are usability factors that you have to think. You can't just put the data out and assume people are going to use it. But you have to really think about what are the costs to the user? How easy is it for the users to actually use this data? What's the availability of access? Is it fair and easy for everybody as well? So you got to think about these user acceptance factors when you put this data out there. And then technology-driven factors. Do you have the capabilities within your technology team to manage this data? The data's got to be clean, it's got to be scrubbed, it's got to be documented, and so forth. And then you also need an infrastructure for storing it and for sharing it and protecting it as well. So those are a number of key factors that you have to face. And then, are we doing things right? So we say, yeah, I want to do this data stuff, but are we doing it right? And I think a lot of governments struggle with this. Citizens may be dissatisfied. Costs certainly can be hard to control, especially with getting the data together. There's a certain vulnerability that you face when you put your data out there, because then now it adds another layer of scrutiny into your local government organization. And so those are some challenges that you have to face. And social media is a big part of open data, because once the data is there, you're going to see the development of social media tools to get access to it. And so part of your open government strategy is, what do you need to focus on to really make sure that that this information and data is being used? And most times we tend to jump in thinking about the social media part, what's the application going to be? Versus thinking about what's our big mission, what's our goal? And your goal should start is, what type of experience do I want the people that live in my community to have when I provide this data? And so that's where you need to focus on that overall mission and those goals, and then get into the very specific tactics. And I think if you take a step back and think about the broader mission first, then the tactics, you're likely to be much more successful. And then big data isn't like managing the data from 20 years ago or even 5 years ago. The size of the volume of the data that we're dealing with now is large. It's terabytes worth of data, petabytes worth of data. And so our tools don't do it. Our spreadsheets can't handle sometimes this large amount of data. Our traditional relational database can't hold this type of data. We're used to using data warehouses to store this data. Data warehouses have gotten better in storing both structured and unstructured data. The trend now is, data warehouses are good, but there's a process you have to go through where you have to organize the data, put it into a structured format, clean the data, and so forth, and then put it in a structured format, and then use it for analysis. There's a new approach, what they call data lakes. So as the data is streaming, it can be stored in a way that people then can slice down the data and then look at it. It keeps it in its natural form. And then once you find the data that you need, then you do the scrubbing and cleaning and putting it in a form where you can do further analysis. And so we're seeing a lot of innovations from the big data side of things on the internet to really help local governments think about new ways of working with this type of data and so forth. And then, of course, you've got to have some strategy to govern this data. And you have to pay a lot of attention to it because of the vulnerabilities. And so you need a plan and a strategy for being a good steward of the data, your policies for access to and use of the data, sharing it, maintaining the data, and also managing the security and the privacy of that data. And so these are very big issues that add to the cost and complexity of any open government, open data type of strategy. So with that, I'm happy, we've got a few minutes left, but I'm happy to take some questions from you all. And you can type them in the box here. Oh, somebody's typing right now. And there's a little time delay. We get a little thing here saying people are typing, and there's a little time delay before it actually pops on the screen. Kathy is asking, what might be a good strategy for following government, following government use of data. Uh, Kathy, what do you mean by following government use of data? By that, do you mean, I'm just going to take a little, I think she's typing, but I think she may mean, oh, right, yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting. Because of FOIA, Open Meeting Acts, government agencies are required to put information data out there. So, for example, I talked with a federal agency just a month ago about this very particular problem, where they're releasing data for a program, but they were also struggling to think about what are good ideas of how the public could use it. So what I've seen to help jumpstart that are these, one examples are these app contests. Washington, D.C. did this. They set up their open data site. They wanted to see use of the data. They incentivized it by this app contest where they got developers, and they got really cool civic-minded, people. Um, and the applications were a lot different than what the government thought as well. So one of the examples was about biking in Washington, D.C., because there's a lot of interest among particularly young folks on biking around town. So there were a number of apps that were helping people to have good maps and real-time information about biking routes going from certain locations and actually doing route finders. And so those app contests are a great way because it takes the pressure off your local agency to come up with the ideas, but you let the public do it. And those are really great examples. And then figuring out a way of sharing those ideas as well, and so forth. And there's a number of companies that have spun off by doing this. Up in 1871 in Chicago is an incubator space, and there are about 4 or 5 different companies there that do work on using local government data and for apps, and they've developed some internet startups by doing that as well. But yeah, it's often hard to figure out how to use the data. And so these app contests are helping to market and publicize that the data is available. Setting up meetings where you can have these meet and greets with people to come in and you share more insights about the data and so forth is another great thing to do. Or these webinars, types of things are things I see cities do and so forth. Or even letting out contracts with companies, and that way you can get a couple of apps that are used with your local data as well is another good way of doing it. By that, do you mean, I'm just going to take a little, I think she's typing, but I think she may mean, oh, right, yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting. Because of FOIA, Open Meeting Acts, government agencies are required to put data out there. So, for example, I talked with a federal agency just a month ago about this very particular problem, where they're releasing data for a program, but they were also struggling to think about what are good ideas of how the public could use it. So what I've seen to help jumpstart that are these, one examples are these app contests. Washington, D.C. did this. They set up their open data site. They wanted to see use of the data. They incentivized it by this app contest where they got developers, and they got really cool civic-minded, people. And the applications were a lot different than what the government thought as well. So one of the examples was about biking in Washington, D.C., because there's a lot of interest among particularly young folks on biking around town. So there were a number of apps that were helping people to have good maps and real-time information about biking routes going from certain locations and actually doing route finders. And so those app contests are a great way because it takes the pressure off your local agency to come up with the ideas, but you let the public do it. And those are really great examples. And then figuring out a way of sharing those ideas as well, and so forth. And there's a number of companies that have spun off by doing this. Up in 1871 in Chicago is an incubator space, and there are about 4 or 5 different companies there that do work on using local government data and for apps, and they've developed some internet startups by doing that as well. But yeah, it's often hard to figure out how to use the data. And so these app contests are helping to market and publicize that the data is available. Setting up meetings where you can have these meet and greets with people to come in and you share more insights about the data and so forth is another great thing to do. Or these webinars, types of things are things I see cities do and so forth. Or even letting out contracts with companies, and that way you can get a couple of apps that are used with your local data as well is another good way of doing it. Okay. Well, thanks. Well, we're at 1 o'clock, and if you have any questions, you can just shoot me an email. I'm at jongant@illinois.edu. And I just want to say thanks again to our partners with Extension uh, as well for the webinar series. And then if you are, a local government and you have additional questions or you need help, just let me know. With our grant, we've got another until June 30th on the grant. We're also available to help your local government with any strategies around e-government and so forth, as well, from training to strategic planning, looking at what your ideas are around open government or an e-government and so forth as well. So if you have any of those kinds of opportunities, just let myself know, Jon Gant or Kathy Brown, or just get anybody from Extension, and they'll get to me, and be happy to talk with you more about that as well too. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gant, for the presentation today. And on behalf of the Local Government Information and Educational Network, we would like to thank you for being involved with this Telenet series. And this presentation will conclude the 3 program series. It will be made available through the Local Government Information and Educational Network. And we look forward to seeing everyone during our next webinar, which will be coming in January. So with that, we will sign off, and thank you for everyone for attending.